Good evening. Welcome to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. Well, to say that the last year has been a bit of a roller coaster would be a bit of an understatement. For most of 2020, we've been trying to navigate a harrowing global disaster. And we've done so with a lot of resourcefulness and courage. We have found new ways to love and live and try to be happy under some really tough conditions. The good news is that obviously we have what it takes to keep going. And I think we can take a lot of comfort in that. Because whatever helped us get this far is obviously still there. So how do we keep building on that resilience going forward as we head into colder temperatures and the winter blues? Well, joining us tonight to give us some answers and some self-care strategies to get through the next few months are some very special guests. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Goldspink. Dr. Goldspink is a registered naturopathic doctor with a holistic approach to wellness. She's an expert on women's health and cancer prevention and the co-founder of Hello.me, which is a line of wellness and hormone tonics. She manages the health of many of Canada's leading executives and is also a regularly featured wellness expert on Cityline. Welcome to the show, Dr. Goldspink.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm really happy to be here.
It's a pleasure. And next, it's my pleasure to introduce Jessica Brubacher, who's joining us all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. She's a TEDx speaker, a licensed professional counselor, and the clinical director of an outpatient facility. When she's not seeing clients and supervising counselors, Jessica is the host of a podcast called Brutiful Journey. Prior to working in mental health, Jessica spent 12 years in public education as a classroom teacher and a school counselor in Phoenix. Thank you so much for joining us, Jessica.
I am so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. We're at such an interesting spot in our lives right now where we're collectively grieving the loss of the life that we once had, some of the rituals that we once enjoyed, and not just as a society, but as an entire planet. There's a sense that life is not going to be quite the same again after all this is over, just like going to the airport has never been the same since 9/11. And I was wondering if you could both speak personally to some of the new rituals that you've created during the pandemic to try and replace some of the new things, some of the things that you're missing to create a sense of normalcy. What are some of the things that you have a newfound gratitude and appreciation for? Maybe, Elizabeth, we can start with you.
Yeah, I think for me and for the clients that I work with, having a really well-rounded lifestyle protocol and, staying in balance with our circadian rhythms as much as we're able to, and ensuring that the inherent pillars of good health are there and that they are in place during our day. So we can get deeper into what those are and what that entails and looks like, but that would be ensuring that you have adequate nutrition in your diet, maybe targeted supplementation if that's applicable to you, ensuring that you have daily movement, at least 30 minutes of exercise every day, whether that's a brisk walk or going to the gym, ensuring that your sleep is on track, so 7 to 8 hours every night of sleep that actually rejuvenates you, and your response to psychological and environmental stressors. And that's something that can be augmented or changed with different practices. So ensuring that those 4 fundamentals are in place, that's something that's been integral to my life during these challenging times and integral to the life of my clients as well when they're looking to really achieve balance, which is really a state of flow because there's never a perfect balance.
It's really about getting that self-care in on a baseline level, isn't it? Because you could take any number of bubble baths and drink hot cocoa all day, but eventually you have to get out of that bathtub. And eventually that cup of hot cocoa is going to come to an end and you have to go back to what's waiting for you. And so building resilience is a lot more than that sort of pop culture, social media kind of picture of resilience that we all think about. And Jessica, you really spoke a lot about that in your wonderful TED Talk, Self-Care is Not Selfish. You really spoke to how getting self-care is not just a pedicure. Can you speak a little bit more on that? What did you mean by that?
Absolutely. I think, we look at this idea of self-care and a lot of times it is like, oh, I'm going to leave my family to go get a pedicure, or I'm going to take time away from dinner to take the bubble bath. And I don't think that self-care is about taking away from our other relationships. I think it's just about putting ourselves first and not at the detriment of other people. And so the first question about what have I done specifically, I've really implemented like a formalized gratitude practice. I've implemented a lot of movement into my life. And I've really been giving myself a lot of grace with the way that I speak to myself. But I think the key is that I do it all first thing in the morning, because it's so easy to get lost in the needs of other people, regardless of what you do. I'm a therapist, I'm seeing clients all day. And also, if I don't get myself set first, that makes that part of my job really difficult. And I think that's true for so many people and so many industries and so many jobs. And so for me, it's not about taking care of yourself occasionally. It's about really putting yourself first so that you can pour into the other people in your life.
So obviously setting boundaries is a big part of that. And there's so many spaces in which we can set boundaries now that our lives have sort of gone from compartmentalizing to everything kind of clashing and blending with each other. How do you instruct your clients or coach your clients and your patients to set those boundaries, not just with other people, but in their daily lives? Let's start with
personally, start with me.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I actually, we do it in our sessions, and we do it more like a formalized, like, first of all, let's talk about where you would like to set boundaries. And now let's put it in your day. Like I said, I do most of my things first thing in the morning. But what that means is I really have to set boundaries around, I'm not going to check my email when I wake up first thing in the morning, because my morning time is about me. And if that doesn't work for somebody else, maybe it's their afternoon time. What that means is you're going to put your phone away so that if somebody sends you a text message or gives you a call or whatever the case may be, it's away. And so it really starts with a conversation and then creating an intentional plan, however it works best for that particular human in that particular human's life. I think is where I go with that.
Elizabeth, as someone in the healthcare space, I'm sure you've seen firsthand how without mental health, there can be no health at all. And I know you focus a lot on things like sleep, nutrition, diet, the gut, and I definitely want to delve deeper into that later on in the show. But I'm curious what your experience has been with the emotional side of things and how those emotions can lead to us not feeling well or not managing our lives as well as we could.
Great question. There's two things that Jessica said that I want to touch on. And the first one is the use of the word intentional, because I find as women and as busy, productive women, we tend to be reactionary in response to our schedules. So we're dealing with things as they're coming up. We're often dealing with children. We're firefighting a lot of the time. And so I think being very intentional about your day, and of course, there's always going to be elements of uncertainty. Things are always going to arise that are unexpected. And so you'll deal with that on an as needed basis, but being very intentional about what your day looks like and actually looking at your schedule for the week and saying, hey, does this schedule match my values? Does this schedule actually match what my intended output is and what I want to create? So being intentional is a very heart-centric practice where you actually get your heart and your mind aligned. And so I think that makes a huge difference over time if you can learn to just be a little bit less reactionary and a little bit more intentional. So that was the first thing Jessica highlighted on. And the second one is the fact that as women, I find clients often feel really guilty about putting themselves first. And Jessica, I'm sure this is something that you've experienced a lot as well. They want to put their families first, their husbands first, their jobs first, etc. And I think that if you're able to emphasize the fact that when you put yourself first and your glass is full and you're beaming with energy because you've been able to take care of yourself, you've been able to have that 8 hours of sleep, you haven't been working until 3 a.m. dealing with responding to work emails, and you're able to take care of yourself by doing self-care, which we'll get more into, and eating well, then you are this source of energy that emanates out from you, and that has a beneficial effect on your family, on your work, on everyone else. And so really learning to operate from that perspective of, hey, I need to fill my cup first, and I need to ensure that I'm adequately rejuvenated in order to be my best for others. I think that's a really important realization for a lot of women.
I love that. And I think that really hits the root cause of why a lot of women don't take enough time for self-care. Jessica, I'm curious, how often does the word guilt come up in your practice and with your patients?
At least once a day. I think that people have a lot of guilt around it. And I also think that people have a lot of shame in the, if I'm putting myself first, then I'm not being a good enough, fill in the blank, a good enough mom, a good enough worker, a good enough wife. And I think a lot of that, I love that you connected with that word intentional, because I think that what ends up happening for especially women who are in like a caregiver role, like a mother or a counselor or a nurse or, whatever it is that we get into our day and logically we can say, yeah, I know my needs are important, but in this moment, the little kid in front of me or the person that needs to eat lunch or my patient, their needs are more urgent than mine. So we always go to theirs. And that's why I think the intentionality piece is so important, because if you can take care of yourself first, not only is your cup full, are you bright, are you, illuminating that energy, also you're already taken care of. So when those urgent needs come up, it's less guilty because you are able to give your whole self to them.
I like that. And when you think about, I was going to say, when you think about how do you feel, so say you stay up until 3 a.m. pushing through other people's needs, replying to work emails, etc. How do you feel that next day? How do you respond to people? Are you short-tempered? Are you kind? Are you compassionate? What sort of dietary choices do you make? Right? So this is sort of in action, seeing how making decisions that support yourself actually have this downstream effect of benefiting everyone else in your day as well. You make different decisions.
Yeah,
I think that really requires being present in the moment and really kind of noticing your behaviors and how they tie into your actions and what you did the night before and so on. Jessica, you mentioned a gratitude journal. What are some of the things that you're grateful for since the pandemic started?
Well, every day is a little bit different. So I almost always write something like, I'm really grateful for my coffee. I am always grateful for my little cat, Henry. And then also it's just things like, I'm grateful that I was able to have a conversation with this particular friend yesterday, or I'm grateful that, Arizona is the desert. It was 102 degrees yesterday. I'm grateful that that's not 115. So, I mean, for me, a formalized gratitude practice is really about the small moments of gratitude. And I think that that's true outside of a pandemic, but I think it's especially true when it feels like the world is crashing around you, to be able to center yourself and say, okay, this is not going as I planned 2020 to go.
Yeah.
And there are some small pieces of joy here as well.
Thank you so much for that, Jessica. We're just about to go to break. We'll be right back after this. Good evening and welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We're talking about how to practice better self-care during COVID-19 with special guests Jessica Brubacher and Dr. Elizabeth Goldspink. And especially we're talking about the importance of taking self-care from a proactive standpoint. So if your house is a mess and you don't have boundaries with that toxic friend or family member that keeps bugging you, it doesn't really matter how many candles you light or how many bubble baths you take, because the root cause of your stress is still there. And going back to what we were just discussing over the break, Elizabeth, you mentioned the importance of not policing your self-care and really being present in the moment. Can you touch a little bit more on that for our viewers tonight?
Absolutely. I find so many of us are used to having these checklists, and they often are work related, but then also personal life related. So we're going through our day trying to check off all the things that we've got on our list. And unfortunately, that has also infiltrated the way that we approach wellness. So wellness for many of us ends up being this thing that we use to police our lives with. And if we feel as though we haven't done enough, it's a way for us to buy into this, oh, I should have done that, or I'm not good enough type of mentality, and often it's subconscious. So I think a good way of looking at wellness is not, checking off that I did that yoga class or that I got that pedicure or whatever I'm doing for self-care, but actually thinking about how you're engaging in the process of that activity. So while you're doing that yoga class, while you're, taking that time to read, while you're doing that thing that is your intentional downtime, are you fully present in that activity? Are you distracted? Are you actually there connecting to that thing? I think that's much more important than checking things off your list.
And I think concentration and focus and attention has really suffered since the start of the pandemic. I know that's true for me. I don't have the same level of patience as I did before. It's become more difficult for me to watch an entire movie or to read an entire book. And I think it's because I'm always thinking about all the other things that I have to do that are sort of waiting for my attention. I think that's so true for so many of us, where we've gone from being able to compartmentalize our various roles in society to all of a sudden these roles are all clashing and attempting to blend into a new reality. I mean, so many parents have suddenly been thrust into the role of homeschooling their kids. So all of a sudden they're elementary school teachers and caregivers, and they're trying to pay the bills and keep the lights on by working from home. And, I can't imagine how stressful that must be for some of your clients and patients. I read a really great analogy recently that one of the keys to juggling many things is that of all those balls that you're juggling, some of them are made of plastic and some are made of glass. And so if you drop a plastic ball, it bounces and there's no harm done. But if you drop a glass ball, it shatters. And so you have to prioritize and know which ones are made of plastic and which ones are glass. And sometimes to catch a glass work ball, you'll have to drop a plastic family related ball, and that's totally okay. Jessica, has that been your experience in terms of working with your clients who are sort of being torn between many different directions, and they're just not sure where their day has gone at the end of it because they haven't gotten around to all the things that they need to do?
Yes, it has been my experience. And I think I really like that analogy. And I also think that in a lot of ways, I always approach the idea of self-care that it's about being in a relationship with yourself. And I think in a lot of ways, that relationship with ourselves is one of those glass balls that we think is plastic. And so we think that we can throw that to the side and everything's going to be fine because we have all of these other balls that we're still juggling. And we're like, look at me, I'm still juggling. But the way that, you're showing up inside is affected because that glass ball has been shattered. And so I think people they're just trying to keep it all together right now. And the thing that feels like it can suffer is you, until that's the thing that can't suffer anymore.
Elizabeth, what sort of strategies do you offer to your patients when they come to you and say, I can't concentrate, I can't focus, my mind is racing, I can't sleep? Are there some sort of practical, tangible strategies that you offer in terms of supplements and diet? And, what are some of the things that you might recommend in terms of meditation and deep breathing? Let's go into some of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of stuff that can be done around supplementation, targeted supplementation, but I would never start there. I would always start with the importance of some kind of actual focus and attention training, because if you want to be able to focus and have great attention and concentration, that's through practice. And it doesn't have to be a big practice, but it's through consistent practice, whether that's 5 minutes a day or that's 20 minutes a day. It's whatever you can do. It's just the consistency of that bite-sized piece that's really important. And this can be done through, there's various ways, but meditation in its most basic form is a way to get the mind to actually come to a place of stillness. And the purpose is not to benefit you during that 5 minutes or 20 minutes of stillness, but what ends up happening is that when you have the ability to bring your mind to a place of stillness through a regular practice, you then have the ability to take that out into your everyday life and in your interactions and in your relationships with yourself, the moments that come up where you're having that self-talk during your day, or in your relationships with others, you're able to bring that skill up and you're able to effectively slow time down and make decisions by responding as opposed to reacting. And so for me, that's the purpose of a meditative practice. Everybody can meditate. I hear a lot of people who say to me, no, I have these racing thoughts, my mind's too busy, I can't do it. Everyone can do it. Everyone's mind races. Everyone, has to make 25,000 decisions in a day, micro decisions. And so our minds
Jessica, I know you're a big fan of meditation, and it's actually a really difficult thing to do. I've tried it myself, and I was sort of sitting there, and all I could think about was, laundry and deadlines and how many calories are in a caramel macchiato and all kinds of things I had no business thinking during my meditation process. What role does it play in your journey towards better self-care?
Well, for me personally, it plays a pretty huge role because I think that meditation is one of the best things that you can do for yourself. And I hear the same things from my clients where they tell me, well, I'm not good at meditation. And I'm like, meditation is not something you're good at. It's a practice. You have to do it over and over again. And there's a couple of things that come up for me around that. One, I think it's okay for your mind to wander as you're practicing, right? I look at it like a circle. You start at focus, and then at some point you're going to get distracted because you're a human. And then you notice that you're distracted and you go, I'm distracted. And then you make the choice to return to focus. And at first, you might have to do that a million times in a meditation. And after a while, you have to do it maybe only a half a million times in a meditation. But Elizabeth mentioned that the difference between responding and reacting, I always present it like being able to sit with that stillness gives you the space to be able to respond instead of react.
So how long does it take realistically to get good at meditation? Because there are people in my life that keep pushing me towards it. And I'm just like, I'm such a go person. The idea of sitting still is like torture for me. But at the same time, I know it would be good for me. How long does it take to get to that point where you can comfortably do it every day?
The neat thing is that this has been very empirically studied. So they've done a study at Harvard where they put these EKG machines on monks and they monitored their brain waves, and they found, interestingly, that meditation not only affects your brain function, so the way that you function in relationship to others and to yourself, but it also affects your brain structure. So there's a thickening of your prefrontal cortex where your executive decision making is made through meditation. There's a down regulation of your limbic system or your emotional responses. This is all very measurable with meditation. And so what it takes is 20 minutes a day for 9 weeks. Not long. And there's no good or bad. So at the 9-week mark, if you still have monkey brain, that's not bad. That's okay. It's just the practice of intentionally bringing your attention back to your one-pointed focus, whether that's your breath or something else you've selected.
I know another exercise that's really touted for its stress relieving benefits is deep breathing. And we have about 3 minutes before we go to break again. Jessica, I know you did an exercise recently with some of your clients. Do we have enough time to maybe go through that right now?
I think that we should. It's called box breathing, and I cannot, I did not make it up. I'm not even sure where I got it from. But the act of rhythmic breathing activates the vagus nerve in your brain, which turns on your parasympathetic nervous system and actually physically brings your body down. And I like box breathing because it's really simple and it's even. And lots of people really connect with that. And I always imagine it like it's a box, right? So you breathe in for 4 seconds, you hold it for 4 seconds, you breathe out for 4 seconds, and then you pause for 4 seconds. And I always like to do them in sets of 4. So Barbara, did you say that you would be okay if I led a little 4 box breaths with everybody?
Let's do it. Let's do it right now.
Okay, so I'm gonna start and just follow my hands. Okay, so we are going to breathe in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, pause 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, pause 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, pause 2, 3, 4, in 2, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4, pause 2.
I love it.
Well, and I always tell my clients, do 4. And if you don't feel better, do 4 more. And if you don't feel better, do 4 more. And just keep doing sets of 4 until you feel better. And eventually you will. Sometimes it's a minute, sometimes it's 5, but eventually it works.
So when you pause, is that when you're supposed to hold your breath?
I go in, hold, out, and then you don't have to do anything in particular for 4 seconds. Just give yourself a break from the intentionality of it.
So what exactly does it do to your body physiologically?
It calms it down. It slows the racing heart. When you're in fight or flight, your body is preparing to, run away from a bear, right? And in this world right now, bears are not necessarily, maybe in Canada, I don't know. In Arizona, we don't have to worry about bears. But your body doesn't understand the difference between an emotional threat and a physical threat. And so you're reacting the same way. But when you do that deep rhythmic breathing, it essentially sends your body the message like, hey, Jessica, there's no bear here. Calm down. You're fine.
It's funny, Jessica, because I actually just saw a bear the other day. They're not that uncommon. Although, of course, we all have metaphorical bears in our lives. We're just about ready to go to break, but when we come back, Elizabeth, I'd love to hear more about the 4 pillars of health, how to get a better night's sleep, and better diet. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We're in the studio talking tonight about practicing better self-care during COVID-19 with special guests Jessica Brubacher and Dr. Elizabeth Goldspink. Elizabeth, as we're moving into cold and flu season, and of course, second wave being top of mind, practicing proactive self-care is more important than ever so we can boost our immunity. And with that being said, I'd love to delve more deeply into your practice in terms of the 4 pillars of good health as a foundation for good health: diet, exercise, sleep, and stress response. Maybe we can start with sleep, because I know rest is so important, and yet so many of us struggle with getting a really good night's sleep. For me, I can't remember the last time I woke up feeling really refreshed and well rested. I think that's really kind of the elusive holy grail for many of us. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I'm glad you mentioned proactive self-care with respect to COVID-19, because we talk so much about the external and, the incidences and the screening and the drugs that are in development and the vaccinations. And that's all wonderful. But we also need to be talking about what we can do from within to optimize our response and to optimize our immune system so that if we are to encounter COVID-19, that we respond optimally and so that our symptom severity is as low as it possibly can be. And fortunately, there are evidence-based recommendations to help with that and to ensure that our immune response is optimal with respect to COVID-19. So we'll get into some of those specific interventions in a little while, but I'm glad you mentioned sleep, because so many people have issues with this, especially because of the challenging times and the racing minds that we all have because of the uncertainty. And sleep is such an important one, because sleep is when your body heals and regenerates on a cellular level. And so it's extremely important for us to be getting to bed by 11 p.m. every night, and for us to be aiming for 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. And, I have a lot of clients who say, oh, but I'm a night owl. I work well at night. And so I always say, that's a story you need to stop telling yourself now. Everybody operates well on circadian rhythms just because we are creatures who operate inherently, in rhythms and flows of nature. And so we all need to be sleeping when it's dark out, waking up when it's light out, and using these optimal circadian flows to feel our best.
Let's talk a little bit more about what a circadian rhythm is for those of our viewers who may not know. So is that the theory that we need to be asleep during certain times and awake during certain times?
Yeah, exactly. So it's as simple as eating during daylight hours, sleeping, when it's dark out. There's a lot of good evidence now to show that when you sleep by 11 p.m., your levels of growth hormone and your other hormones are optimized. And there was actually a huge clinical trial that was done last year that for the first time showed that a group of people who ate the same amount of calories as another group of people, but they ate it within daylight hours, didn't gain weight, and didn't have any adverse effects on their insulin and blood sugar levels. Whereas the people who ate the exact same thing every day, they actually had weight gain and imbalances in their blood sugar and other hormone levels. So this is something that's very measurable and across the whole human experience. There's many things that are personalized in medicine, but obeying our body's natural circadian rhythms of night and day, and when we're awake and when we're eating and when we're sleeping, that is essential for all of us to be on track with.
And you mentioned being in bed by 11 o'clock, and I've heard the theory that every hour of sleep you get before midnight is worth 2 hours after midnight. Is that true?
Well, that's in keeping with this theory of circadian rhythms. And it's interesting when you look at night workers. So, for example, nurses who often work at night. And if you look at their incidences of things like breast cancer in particular and other types of cancers, they're far higher. And there's, for reasons that can only be attributed to the fact that they are awake during the night and asleep during the day. And when you cross out all the other factors in the data. And so it's more than just not feeling your best. There are other things happening physiologically at a cellular level that are setting you up for success when you are getting to bed by 11 p.m.
So I think there are maybe two classes of people in terms of people who struggle with insomnia. There are people who struggle with falling asleep, and then there are people who wake up in the middle of the night and they can't get back to sleep, or they can't get back to the same deep sleep they once had. How do you deal with those groups of patients?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the first group where they actually have difficulty falling asleep, it's often due to anxious thoughts and to racing minds. And so with that group of people, it's often about changing their sleep hygiene. So screens at night, bright lights at night, not having a blue light protector on your phone after sunset. Those types of things have an impact on stimulating your mind. People who watch TV in bed, not optimal. And we should be really turning lights down and not on screens about an hour before bed, and that can have a big impact. Another thing that can have an impact is like doing your meditation at night. So there are apps out there like Calm and Headspace who have 10-minute go to sleep meditations, and that can be a really great way to program your mind to start gearing down at night if you find that to be a challenge. And for the other subset of people who wake up at night, those tend to be the ones who, things like melatonin and some of the supplements can be really helpful for that subgroup of people.
I've heard magnesium is really great. Taking a bath with Epsom salts, for instance, can really calm you down. And of course, lavender oil, things like that.
Absolutely. And magnesium together with melatonin would be a great starting point for some of those people.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to bring up the point that getting enough rest is more than just sleep, and rest could mean, as you mentioned, Elizabeth, time spent offline, or a break from feeling like we need to do it all, or turning phones off, but also spending more time with people who nourish us and avoiding those who do not, and then doing absolutely nothing without feeling guilty. And I wonder, Jessica, if you could speak to that in terms of some of the things that you advocate for your patients, or even in your personal life.
Well, and I think for me, that comes down to a boundary, whether we're talking about a boundary with a particular person in your life that is not serving you in that relationship, or a boundary with your time of, I'm going to turn off my screen at this time. And I often talk about it as it relates to sleep, because I like to tell people, this is not nearly as scientific, but I like to say, listen, when you're sleeping, you have firefighters that come in that calm down your body, and then you have construction workers that rebuild. If you can help your body to calm down before you go to bed, you have more of an opportunity to rebuild. And so spending those last few hours of your day off a screen, doing a meditation with that lavender oil or whatever the thing is that works for you, is going to help your body physically so that you can face your next day. And I think all of that falls under the category of self-care, because you're taking care of yourself before you're having to go into your day.
I love that analogy of firefighters and construction workers. And I think some of my girlfriends might have a really good time with that analogy as well. Thank you so much for sharing that. Elizabeth, I thought maybe we could switch gears and talk about, diet and nutrition. I mean, obviously we all know how to avoid processed foods and, cut down on sugar and things like that. But what are some practical strategies that we can all incorporate to eat more healthy, maybe baby steps, so that we don't get completely overwhelmed with overhauling our diet with everything else that's going on?
Yeah, and I think honoring the baby steps, that's so important. We so often are looking for this quantum leap where it's like, I want to feel better, so I'm going to do these 100 things starting tomorrow. And what happens is those 100 things don't end up sticking. So you're much better just to pick one thing One easy thing. Maybe it takes 5 minutes, and stick with that one thing every single day, because it's consistency that really pays dividends with respect to your health. And so for diet, I mean, there's no one diet that is appropriate for everyone. Through, taking a good case, understanding what works for people and what doesn't work for them. There are different diets that are appropriate for different people, but there are some foundational things that are appropriate for everyone. And so I'd love to chat for a few minutes about what those are. Number one, amazing. Number one is reducing alcohol, reducing caffeine intake, and reducing refined sugars. Good for everybody. There's nobody who those things serve very well and who those things are great for. So a reduction in all of those things is good for everybody. Caffeine also leads us to feel very stimulated. And so if we're having too much of it, we can get overstimulated. And with that comes a subsequent drop. So you end up feeling great and at the top of your game, and then it drops you down to low energy levels, and we get that 3 or 4 p.m. energy slump as a result. So finding other ways to get a burst of energy, or to augment your daily energy flow so that you feel less imbalanced, that's a much better solution than having too much caffeine. And then the next thing is ensuring that you're eating enough fruit and vegetables. It's a simple one, but count. Make sure that at the end of the day, you can count that you've had a minimum of 5 to 6 servings of fruits and vegetables every day. And the reason for that is that fruit and vegetables contain all of your micronutrients, everything like your vitamin C, your zinc, these things that are really the foundation of a solid immune system. And the third thing is ensuring that you have enough protein in your diet. And this is something that I see more commonly an issue with women, where they'll say, I have a salad for lunch. Now, to build strong immune system cells, you actually need proteins, because the amino acids are the building blocks of your immune cells. So make sure you've got chickpeas, or some fish, or a piece of chicken, or what have you, alongside your veggies.
And of course, being up north here in Canada, we're also not getting as much vitamin D as we should. I'm sure that's not a problem that you struggle with in Phoenix, Arizona, Jessica, but low vitamin D is something a lot of Canadians struggle with absorbing. And so you mentioned when we were chatting offline, Elizabeth, about the importance of taking more vitamin D, especially to protect us from COVID-19.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because the single greatest intervention for prevention of COVID-19, if you actually want to reduce severity of symptoms if you are to get it, is vitamin D. So we have good evidence to show that if your vitamin D levels are in the sufficiency range, that you're much less likely to be put on a ventilator or to have bad symptoms of COVID-19. And if your levels are low, you're much more inclined for that to negatively impact your immune system and for you to require those interventions. So vitamin D is so, so important. And if you don't know your levels, you can have them measured.
Now, we only have about a minute and a half before we go to break, but I wonder if you can quickly go through maybe like your top 5 favorite supplements to take, since we're probably not getting as much vitamins and minerals in our regular everyday diet as perhaps a generation before us did.
Yeah, and there's been some people who have been at different hospitals researching the impact of different nutraceuticals and vitamins on COVID-19 and how it impacts severity. And there's one protocol in particular that I really like that's been practiced, and that consists of vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc together. So the dosage of vitamin C is 1 gram, and the dosage of zinc is 30 to 60 grams. Vitamin D dosage depends upon what your baseline is, where you live in the world. And the other thing is melatonin.
We're just about to go to break. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'd love to hear more about some of these other supplements that you are recommending after we come back from the break. And of course, let's talk about exercise and stress response as well as part of the 4 pillars of good health. So we'll be right back after the break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Ottawa Experts. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and we're talking about how to practice better self-care during COVID-19 with very special guests, Jessica Brubacher and Dr. Elizabeth Goldspink. Now, Elizabeth, before the break, you were just getting into some of your favorite vitamins and supplements that you recommend to clients, because let's face it, our diets are not as rich in vitamins and minerals as they used to be. Let's get back into some of that.
Great. So yeah, as we're moving into cold and flu season, and we're interested in preventing colds and flus, and in preventing, COVID-19, and if we were to get COVID-19, ensuring that our immune systems can respond optimally to that, so that we don't get some of the negative consequences of that. So the protocol that I've been using actually came from the Eastern Virginia Medical School. They've been using it there successfully, and they're doing a lot of data collection on it. And so that consists of vitamin D3, vitamin C and zinc, quercetin, which is an antioxidant that you find in apples and onions and a bunch of vegetables. So it's just in its concentrated form in a supplement called quercetin. Melatonin, which we discussed earlier with
quercetin is, sorry to interrupt.
Sorry?
I think I've seen that on the shelf, and it's spelled Quercitin. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I've actually got a bottle here to show you how it's spelled. Quercetin, sorry. There. Quercetin, so you can see the spelling of it. And this is a special form that's highly absorbed, but any quercetin will do. And we were talking about melatonin earlier with respect to sleep, but melatonin also has a secondary effect on the immune system because it's a very potent antioxidant. It's about 10 times more powerful than vitamin C as an antioxidant, which is a little known fact about melatonin. So that's another one that has been found to be beneficial. So that's the list: vitamin C, zinc, quercetin, melatonin, vitamin D3.
So those are the essentials. Now, should you take vitamin D3 with K2?
Ideally, yes, because K2, from a bone health perspective, actually helps the vitamin D get into your bone. And a lot of people take calcium or eat a calcium-rich diet, and K2 can actually pull the calcium out from potentially depositing in your arteries and get it into your bone. So, yeah, the K2 is an important little helper.
Now, Elizabeth, you mentioned about the importance of getting more protein into your diet and avoiding things like caffeine, alcohol, and sugar. One of the things that I noticed during the pandemic when we went on full lockdown and all the stores were closed, you couldn't go out and see people, you couldn't really shop. The only place you could go to was the grocery store. And the only service you could really get kind of at your fingertips was Uber Eats. And I noticed a lot of people really indulging in treats and fast food and things that are not that great for you as a coping mechanism to get through it all. And Jessica, you had mentioned earlier that you work quite a bit with teens who suffer from eating disorders. And I'm wondering how COVID-19 has sort of exacerbated or thrown in another challenge for people who are dealing with those issues.
Well, I mean, in a couple of ways, we have such a complicated relationship with food as humans at this particular juncture in history. And so it sort of depends on what you're struggling with. I've noticed a lot of people definitely using food as a coping skill, whether that means like I'm going to let myself, overindulge when it's not appropriate. And I also have seen a lot of times where people are using COVID-19 as I think the best word is like I don't necessarily want to say excuse, but I think that's the best word, where they're not having to go out to restaurants and deal with those things. So it's a lot easier for them to restrict because we are at home and you don't really notice unless you're paying attention to it. So we definitely have seen a little bit of a resurgence in our eating disorder population during the pandemic. And I think complicated is the best word there. And it's just because our relationship with food already was, and now we throw this other piece on top of it that makes things even more complicated.
And that ties into how we respond to stress, which I know, Elizabeth, is one of the 4 pillars of good health as a foundation. Let's speak a little bit about that in terms of some of the things that you recommend.
Yeah, and stress wreaks havoc on your immune system as well. So you can have a perfect diet, you can be exercising, sleeping well, and yet you're prone to getting colds and flus all the time because of the way that you respond to psychological stressors or the level of psychological stressors in your life. And so that's a really important pillar. And when any one of these 4 pillars are out of balance, you can find yourself in a complete state of imbalance, even though the other 3 are in balance. And psychological stressors are more of an insidious one because oftentimes some of these things are not in our conscious awareness until we bring them into our conscious awareness. So it's good to be mindful not only of, how much stress are you exposed to, and is that too much, and can you mitigate or reduce some of those environmental stressors, but how are you responding to those stressors? And taking a look at that, and then looking at ways that you can implement some practices into your lifestyle. And some of those are self-care practices, and be consistent with them so that you can actually change the way that you respond to stress, because we know that neurons that fire together wire together. So you actually change your brain. Your brain is neuroplastic, and you actually change it by the way that you respond over time. And so it's really important to, with that awareness that these neurons that are firing together are wiring together, being very intentional about how you respond to things. And that can be something that you gain with practice.
What are 3 things that you do personally every day to practice self-care? Jessica?
So every single day, I do a formalized gratitude practice where I literally write down on a piece of paper 5 things that I'm grateful for. The act of writing it down pen to paper forces you to use both sides of your brain, and it allows you to process it a little bit more deeply. So I physically write down 5 things I'm grateful for every day. I move my body every single day for 30 minutes, whether that means I have like a little solo dance party, or I go for a walk, or, something of that nature. And then I also try to find one thing every day that like fuels my soul. I'm a big fan of like personal development and things of that nature. So I will find something to like listen to a chapter of a book, or listen to a podcast, or something like that. And those are the kinds of things that I can do while I'm walking, or while I'm doing the dishes, or whatever that is. But those are probably my top 3: gratitude, movement, and then just something that fuels my soul.
I love that you speak to things that fuel your soul, because again, there's so many different types of self-care, right? Like there's financial self-care, there's intellectual self-care, there's work self-care. And so we really need to address all those different areas, right? What about you, Elizabeth? What are 3 things that you do every day that really kind of ground you?
Yeah, I think very similar to Jessica, actually. So I think the 3 things that I do every day that ground me are when I wake up in the morning, I do a gratitude practice and I move. And that can be as simple as a brisk walk, or I love that Jessica said a dance party by myself, because we often think we have to go to the gym or, do these major big things that take a lot of time. We don't. We can have a dance party. We can go for a brisk walk, and that's good enough. So I do that while I do my gratitude practice. And then in the evening, I always have intentional downtime where I take time for contemplation, whether that is reading a book that's uplifting or that's journaling. I do whatever type of contemplation I think would be the most beneficial, really reflecting on that day. I do that at the end of every day.
Is starting a gratitude practice, is it difficult? Like, is it as difficult as meditating, for instance? Because it's sad to say, but it doesn't feel inherently natural. It feels like it's something we have to train ourselves to do.
I love that you said that, because you actually do have to train yourself to do it, right? And the interesting thing is there's this book called The Buddha's Brain where they talk about this wiring. And as humans, we're all programmed to focus on the negative. When negative things come up, that is what sticks with us. That's what we hold on to. That's what keeps going through our mind. And so to change that, you actually have to do it as a practice. You have to intentionally focus on the positive. And then what happens is that the positive starts to become your new normal.
And Jessica, you had some thoughts about that?
Well, what I love about it is that it is a practice. It definitely is something you have to train yourself. You have to intentionally, and like I said, I write it. I sit down at my table every morning and I write down these things. And I notice that I start to look for, like tomorrow, I'm going to write that I was super grateful to be a part of Ottawa Experts, because that I'm looking for things to be grateful for, right? And I also notice that now that it's a habit and it's a practice and it's a part of my everyday, if I could be having like a really tough day, and almost always when I'm like, I'm in a terrible mood today, I miss my gratitude practice. And so it's really just become a part of, who I am and how I operate each day.
I really love that. We only have a few minutes left before the end of our show, but I was wondering, Elizabeth, if we could delve quickly into the gut connection to stress, because so many of us have troubles in that department. And I think you mentioned to me earlier, 80% of our immune system is in the gut.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up, Barbara, because it has such an impact. So it's less about taking these, extra supplements and things, and more about the foundational things. And the gut is the foundation of good health. Like you said, 70 to 80% of our immune system and our immune cells are located in our gut. brain neurotransmitter, serotonin. We think of that in our brain. Most of that's in our gut. And so our gut impacts our brain. It impacts our immune system. It impacts our energy levels. It impacts so much. And so ensuring that we have a healthy gut with very low levels of inflammation is very important. And all of those 4 pillars that we've discussed. So just to review them, there's the diet, there is the sleep, there's the movement, and there's the reduction in response to psychological stressors. All of those impact your gut. And so, it's very important to get that on track in order to feel like your best self.
We're almost at the end of our time together. It's gone by so quickly. I like to take this time, this period of the show, to ask you if you have any parting thoughts for our audience, and if there's anything that you're looking forward to that you'd like to share. Elizabeth, I believe you're coming to Ottawa soon, or you'll be presenting virtually at a conference that's being held in Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly. So tomorrow, October 1st, I'll be speaking at the GEM conference in Ottawa. So it's for female entrepreneurs who are looking to, build their businesses or take their business digital during COVID-19 and the challenges around that, and also the wellness experience around that. So tickets are available at gemconference.ca. And so it can be watched anytime up until the end of the year, or you can join us live tomorrow.
Perfect. I'm looking forward to that. And of course, we can find you online at your website or on Instagram.
Yes. So online, I'm on Instagram, Dr. Goldspink, or online, drgoldspink.com.
Wonderful. And Jessica, can you talk to us briefly about your podcast and where we can find you?
Yes, the second season of Beautiful Journey, the podcast, is launching in October, and it's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever, whatever format you get your podcast in. I'm super excited about that. It's a mixture of interviews and they call them solo casts in the podcast world. And it's just about, finding the things that fill you up. I always say find your because we're more than just one thing. And so I'm super excited about that it's launching in October.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you so much, Elizabeth. Thank you to you both for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and insights with our audience. It's been a very insightful discussion that I think many will find valuable.
Thank you, Barbara. It's been a pleasure.
I agree.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in the studio next week. Have a good night.